Okay, so today we're going deep on Aleister Crowley.
Ah, yes, Crowley.
This should be a fun one.
I think so.
We've gotten a lot of requests to cover him.
Makes sense.
People seem to be really fascinated by him and a little terrified of him, too.
Yeah, he definitely had that effect on people.
So we're going to try to unpack all that today using this text, Occulto, Aleister Crowley, which I have to admit, even the title is kind of ominous.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like a horror movie, doesn't it?
It really does, but I think it's good. We need to grapple with that side of him, too.
Absolutely. We can't just ignore the controversy.
Right, because he was known as the wickedest man in the world, so we have to address that.
Precisely. He cultivated that image, and it's part of his story, but it also tends to overshadow everything else.
Yeah, so we're diving into all of it, the good, the bad, the magical.
And trying to understand what drove him, what made him tick.
Right, like why revive this cult of shadows, as the text puts it.
Yeah, why go down that path?
Yeah. And to really get a handle on Crowley, I think we need to go back to the beginning to 1875 when he was born.
Right into a world that was actually kind of primed for someone like Crowley.
How so?
Well, the text points out that 1875 was a really significant year in the world of occultism.
Oh, interesting.
It's like all these forces were converging.
Give me some examples.
Okay, so you have the death of Eliphas Levi.
Big name in occultism.
Absolutely. He really shaped modern magical thought.
So his death must have left a kind of void.
Exactly.
Like a vacuum waiting to be filled.
Right. And then in the same year, you have the founding of the Theosophical Society.
Which was all about bringing those Eastern spiritual ideas to the West.
Right. Helena Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, they really shook things up.
And Isis Unveiled came out that year too, right?
First publication. Yeah, so it's like a perfect storm of esoteric energy.
Wow, so Crowley was born right into the middle of this occult revival.
And it's almost like he was destined to play a part in it.
Especially when you consider his upbringing.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other layer.
So he's raised in this super strict Christian sect, the Plymouth Brethren.
Which, in some ways you can see how that might have pushed him toward occultism later on.
It's like a rebellion against dogma.
Exactly. He had this intense aversion to any kind of rigid belief system.
Makes sense. But the text also mentions this really difficult period after his father died.
Oh, yeah. In 1886, Crowley was only 11 then.
And he goes to live with his uncle, which he later described as childhood in hell.
Yeah, that's pretty stark.
It's intense. Like, that kind of experience can leave a mark.
Absolutely. It shapes your whole perspective on the world.
So you have this combination of rebelling against religious dogma and then dealing with this trauma.
And it kind of sets the stage for him to seek out alternative paths.
Right. He's not going to be content with the status quo.
Not at all. Crowley was always pushing boundaries.
And that's really apparent in his early adulthood, too. Like, he was an adventurer at heart.
Oh, yeah, especially when it came to mountaineering.
The text mentions that he was part of those early expeditions to K2 and Kanchenjunga.
Some of the most dangerous mountains in the world.
Yeah, and this was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, so we're talking serious exploration.
No helicopters, no fancy gear.
Just pure grit and determination.
Which Crowley had in spades.
Definitely. And he wasn't just a thrill seeker, he was also an incredible intellect.
Oh, absolutely. He went to Trinity College, Cambridge.
Studied there from 1895 to 1898.
And he dove into everything, literature, philosophy, alchemy even.
He seems to have had this insatiable thirst for knowledge.
Totally. He was like a sponge absorbing everything he could.
Plus, he excelled in sports, too, like rowing and cycling. And the text says he was a very strong chess player.
Yeah, it's almost like he was trying to master every aspect of human experience.
Like a Renaissance man, but with an occult twist.
Exactly. And it was through mountaineering that he met Oscar Eckenstein.
Who became a really important mentor.
Oh, yeah. Eckenstein was crucial in shaping Crowley's approach to magic.
In what way?
Well, Eckenstein was much more focused on the practical and the mental aspects of magic.
So less about ritual and more about mental discipline.
Right, he emphasized control and focus, which really resonated with Crowley.
Okay, so let's talk about how Crowley got into the occult in the first place.
So the text says he started exploring magic and mysticism around 1896.
So he's still pretty young.
Yeah, in his early 20s.
And what was it that really made him decide to dedicate his life to this path?
Well, apparently it was a book called Cloud Upon the Sanctuary.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's all about this mystical journey and seeking out the Great White Brotherhood.
Right, this idea of a hidden order of enlightened beings who guide humanity.
So Crowley reads this and he's like, that's it, I'm going for it.
Pretty much he's like, I'm dedicating my life to finding these guys.
Which led him to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn.
The GD. One of the most influential occult groups of the time.
Yeah, it's like the Hogwarts of Western esotericism.
Kind of. They were drawing on all these different traditions, Kabbalah, Egyptian magic, Hermetic philosophy.
And some pretty big names were
Oh,
members.
yeah, W.B. Yeats, the poet.
Gustav Meyrink, who
Yeah.
wrote The Golem.
Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, even.
So it was a pretty serious group.
Definitely not just dabbling in the occult.
So how did Crowley get involved?
Well, the text says he was introduced to S.L. McGregor Mathers, one of the leaders of the GDs, through some friends,
And he's initiated in November 1898.
taking the magical motto, Perdurabo, which means, I will endure to the end.
That's kind of intense.
Yeah, shows you he was serious about this path.
So Crowley's in the Golden Dawn, learning from these masters of the occult.
And he's a natural, he progresses through the ranks really quickly.
The text specifically mentions Alan Bennett as being a major influence.
Yeah, Bennett was like Crowley's first real magical teacher.
He taught him Kabbalah and ceremonial magic and how to consecrate talismans.
Bennett was a pretty fascinating character himself.
But even though Crowley was excelling in the GD, there was some drama going on.
There always is, right?
So the text says that some of the London-based members were getting jealous of Crowley's rapid progress.
It's like the classic story, the talented newcomer disrupts the established order.
Plus, Crowley was living a pretty unconventional lifestyle, which probably didn't help.
Yeah, he was always pushing boundaries, testing limits.
So they actually blocked his initiation into the Second Order in 1899.
They were like, nope, you're not ready.
But Mathers, who was the head honcho of the GD, saw things differently.
He recognized Crowley's potential.
And he actually initiated Crowley into the Adeptus Minor grade himself.
In Paris, in January 1900.
That must have really pissed off the London group.
Oh yeah, it was a major power move.
And it essentially led to the breakup of the Golden Dawn.
It was the catalyst for the schism.
So now you have all these different factions of the GD popping up.
Many of them becoming much more Christianized and kind of losing that original spark.
And Crowley's left in the middle of all this wondering what to do next.
So he goes traveling. He heads to New York and then to Mexico.
And Mexico seems to have been a pretty important period for him.
Oh yeah, it's where he really starts to develop his own unique magical system.
Tell me more.
Well, for one thing, he writes Tannhauser in Mexico.
Which is a really interesting work.
It's kind of a blend of poetry and magic and eroticism.
Yeah, Crowley was never one to shy away from exploring those themes.
Definitely not.
And the text mentions that he wrote it after performing a magical ritual called opera sexualis.
Which sounds pretty intense.
To say the least.
But Crowley was always pushing the boundaries of magical practice.
He wasn't afraid to experiment.
Exactly. And in Mexico, he also gets involved in Freemasonry.
Specifically, the Scottish Rite.
And he rises through the ranks quickly there, too.
So he's absorbing all this knowledge from different traditions.
And synthesizing it into his own unique approach.
It's like he's building his own personal magical system brick by brick.
And then Oscar Eckenstein shows up in Mexico.
Hey, old mountaineering, buddy.
And he becomes a really important influence on Crowley again.
How so?
Well, Eckenstein was all about discipline and control.
Which kind of contrasts with Crowley's image as this wild, chaotic figure.
Yeah, but Crowley respected Eckenstein's approach.
And Eckenstein really encouraged Crowley to focus on mental discipline as the foundation of magical practice.
To really train his mind to achieve specific results.
So it's like a more scientific approach to magic.
In a way, yeah.
So after Mexico, Crowley goes to Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka,
To reconnect with Alan Bennett, his old teacher from the Golden Dawn,
who had become a Buddhist monk by this point.
taking the name Bhikkhu Ananda Matea.
Crowley was always drawn to Eastern spirituality.
Yeah, he studied yoga and Buddhism with Bennett in Ceylon.
And then in 1902, he goes back to the Himalayas with Eckenstein for another mountaineering expedition, this time to Kanchenjunga.
Always pushing his limits.
He seems to have had this need to constantly challenge himself, both physically and mentally.
And all these experiences are feeding into his developing magical system.
So it's not just theoretical knowledge, it's grounded in real-world experience.
Exactly. And then in 1903, he returns to Europe. But things are different now.
How so?
Well, his relationship with Mathers has completely fallen apart.
They had a major falling out.
Right. Yeah, over Crowley's increasing independence and his rejection of Mathers' authority.
So Crowley decides to retreat. He goes to Boleskine in Scotland and declares himself Laird of Boleskine.
Which is pretty badass.
It is kind of, and he marries Rose Kelly in 1903.
But the real turning point comes in 1904 in Cairo.
This is when he receives the Book of the Law.
Liber Alveologist, yeah.
which completely changes the course of his life.
It's like the foundation of his entire philosophy.
So tell me about this Cairo experience.
Well, Crowley and Rose are performing these rituals and invocations.
And Crowley claims to be contacted by a being named Aiwass,
Who dictates the book of the law to him.
It sounds pretty wild.
It is pretty wild.
So what's in the book of the law?
Well, it's a dense and complex text, but the core message is about the dawning of a new eon.
A new era.
Right, the eon of Horus.
What's so special about this eon of Horus?
Well, Crowley believed that it marked the end of the old era of suffering and reliance on external deities.
So it's about individual empowerment.
Exactly. The central principle is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Which is often misunderstood.
Oh, yeah. People think it means just do whatever you want, no consequences.
But it's more nuanced than that, right?
Much more. It's about aligning your will with your true purpose.
Finding your true will.
Right, and living in accordance with it.
So it's about self-discovery and self-actualization.
And taking responsibility for your own actions.
So Crowley receives this revelation, and he's like, okay, everything's changed.
The world has shifted on its axis.
And of course, he shares this with Mathers.
Who promptly rejects it.
Which leads to another big falling out.
Yeah. Their relationship is officially over.
Crowley's like, okay, I'm going my own way.
And he does. In 1905, he's off on another Himalayan expedition, this time to Kanchenjunga.
Always back to the mountains.
Seems like he found clarity and inspiration there.
So Crowley's back from the Himalayas. He's broken with Mathers. He's received the Book of the Law. What's next?
Well, in 1907, he founds his own magical order.
The AA.
The Argentium Astrum, or the Silver Star.
And this is his attempt to create a new system of magic based on the principles of Thelema.
Exactly. He sees the Golden Dawn as representing the old era.
The era before the Aeon of Horus.
Right. And the AA is the order for the new eon.
The era of individual will and self-discovery.
And he starts publishing the Equinox, which is this amazing collection of writings, rituals, poetry.
It's like his magnum opus.
Pretty much, it's his attempt to codify his system of magic and make it accessible to others.
And he starts accepting probationers into the AA in 1909.
So he's building a community around these ideas.
And symbolically ending the era of the Golden Dawn.
He even says that he's destroyed the Golden Dawn.
Which is a pretty bold statement.
Crowley was never afraid to be provocative.
And the years between 1907 and 1911 are really productive for him.
He's writing like crazy.
And experiencing some major life changes, too.
His daughter, unfortunately, dies in 1906.
That must have been devastating.
And he divorces Rose Kelly in 1909.
So it's a time of both creative output and personal upheaval.
And in 1911, he wrote Liber, CCCXX3, or The Book of Lies.
Which is this really strange and cryptic book.
It's full of paradoxes and wordplay and hidden meanings.
It's like he's trying to shake the reader out of their complacency.
Make them question everything.
And the Book of Lies ends up catching the attention of another major figure in the occult world.
Theodore Rius, the head of the Ordo Templi Orientis, the OTO.
Now, the OTO is a whole other story.
It's a complex and fascinating order with roots going back to the late 1800s.
So tell me more about it.
Well, it was founded by Karl Kellner, who was said to have received some kind of Eastern initiation.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there are rumors of connections to Sufi and Tantric traditions.
And the OTO was associated with the left-hand path, which emphasizes individual empowerment and breaking free from conventional morality.
Right, it's about challenging societal norms and finding your own path.
And they were also known for practicing sexual magic.
Using sexual energy for spiritual and magical purposes.
Which was pretty controversial at the time.
And still is for some people.
So how did Crowley get involved with the OTO?
Well, Rius reads the Book of Lies, and he's convinced that Crowley has somehow discovered the central secret of the OTO.
Even though Crowley wasn't a member at the time?
Right, which is pretty amazing.
So Crowley's like, yeah, I totally figured it out on my own.
And Rius is so impressed that he appoints Crowley as the head of the OTO for English-speaking countries.
Giving him the magical name Baphomet.
Which is a pretty loaded symbol.
It is. It's associated with all sorts of things, from paganism to Satanism.
But Crowley embraces it.
Of course he does.
And he starts revising the OTO rituals to align them with the principles of Thelema.
So he's merging his own system with this existing order.
Exactly. And in 1914, he co-authors Book 4, which is a key text in the OTO.
So he's really making his mark on the order.
And in 1915, on his 40th birthday, he takes the magical motto to Megatherion 666.
The Great Beast.
Signifying his attainment of the grade of Magus within the AA.
And he writes Liber Aleph, which is this massive and complex work.
It's like his commentary on the Book of the Law.
Then in 1920, he establishes the Abbey of Thelema in Cephalus, Sicily.
which is his attempt to create a community based on Thelemic principles.
It's like his own little utopian experiment.
Kind of, but it doesn't last long.
What happened?
Well, Crowley's lifestyle and the activities at the Abbey were pretty controversial.
To say the least.
And in 1923, Mussolini's government expels Crowley from Italy and shuts down the Abbey.
So it's back to the nomadic life for Crowley.
He spends time in France, Germany, North Africa,
Meeting all sorts of interesting people along the way.
including Karl Germer and Israel Regardie, who become important Thelemites.
And he's expelled from France in 1929.
Yeah, he just couldn't stay out of trouble.
And he eventually ends up back in England.
But he's not done yet.
Not even close.
In 1930, he has this fascinating encounter with the Portuguese poet Fernando Pessoa.
Now, Pessoa was a pretty big deal in the literary world.
He was one of the most important Portuguese writers of the 20th century.
So how did they cross paths?
Well, Pessoa was interested in esotericism, and he had read some of Crowley's work.
And he actually wrote to Crowley pointing out some errors in his astrological chart.
Which is pretty ballsy.
It is. Crowley was not known for taking criticism well.
But somehow they end up meeting in Lisbon.
And there's this whole legend about them staging a fake suicide at a place called Boca do Inferno.
Which translates to mouth of hell.
That's dramatic.
Very Crowley.
So they're hanging out in Lisbon talking about magic and poetry.
And some people say that Pessoa's poetry took on a more esoteric quality after his encounter with Crowley.
It's like Crowley planted a seed in his mind.
Maybe.
So Crowley's back in England, and he's still writing, publishing, working on his magical system.
And in 1937, he publishes The Equinox of the Gods, which is all about his Cairo experience and the reception of the Book of the Law.
And he starts working with Lady Frida Harris to create the Thoth Tarot deck.
Which is one of the most beautiful and influential tarot decks ever created.
It's a work of art in itself.
And it's packed with Crowley's esoteric symbolism and ideas.
So it's like a visual representation of his system of magic.
Exactly. And then in 1942, he publishes Libero Z.
Which is a declaration of individual rights and responsibilities.
It's kind of ahead of its time.
It predates the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
And it really sums up Crowley's philosophy of individual liberty.
So Crowley spends his final years in Hastings, England.
Teaching new disciples, writing letters, working on his last book, Magic Without Tears.
Which is a collection of letters about magic and occultism.
And he dies in 1947 at the age of 72.
From chronic bronchitis and heart problems.
And he has this very Crowley-esque funeral ceremony.
Last ritual.
With readings from his Gnostic Mass and his hymn to Pan.
So that's Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man in the world. The prophet of Thelema, the poet, the mountaineer, the magician, the provocateur.
He is all of those things and more.
A truly complex and contradictory figure.
And his influence is still felt today.
Absolutely. His ideas about individual liberty and spiritual evolution continue to resonate with people all over the world.
And his impact on occultism is undeniable.
He's like the godfather of modern Western esotericism.
He inspired so many other groups and movements.
From the Typhonian OTO to Wicca to chaos magic.
And his influence extends far beyond occultism.
Yeah. He's a pop culture icon.
Musicians, artists, writers, filmmakers have all been inspired by him.
His image and his ideas are everywhere.
He's become this symbol of rebellion and transgression.
And the text argues that this is all part of his plan.
That he knew he wouldn't be fully understood in his own lifetime.
That his true influence would only be felt after his death.
And maybe he was right.
It's certainly something to think about.
It is.
So we've explored Crowley's life, his work, his impact. But I'm left with this question.
What's that?
Why is he still so relevant today? Why do people still find him so fascinating and so terrifying?
It's a good question.
Maybe it's because he represents something that we all crave.
Which is
freedom.
The freedom to define our own lives, our own beliefs, our own paths.
And that's a powerful idea.
It is.
So I guess the final question for our listeners is this. What does Aleister Crowley mean to you?
What do his ideas about freedom and will and self-discovery mean to you in your own life?
It's something to ponder.
Definitely something to ponder.
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel.